Rick Sanchez has been in great pain since the first second you met him. Not tired, not cynical, not eccentric. In pain, the way a person is when they have lost everything that made them want to stay and then decided to keep going anyway, just to spite the universe for taking it. His catchphrase, in the language of the oldest friend he has left, means exactly one thing: I am in great pain, please help me. The show told you that in episode 11 of season 1. Almost nobody heard it. Tonight we are going through every theory, every confirmed piece of lore, and every moment this show laid a clue in plain sight and waited for someone to pick it up. From the fake memory that turned out to be real, to the villain who was a Morty all along, to the genius who built a prison and called it a universe. This is every Rick Sanchez theory, explained. So get comfortable. Turn the lights down if they are up. We will be here a while. And if you have not subscribed to Rick R yet, doing that really does help us keep making these. Start with what the show gives you first, because the theories only mean something once you understand what they are working against. The official story, the mask, the performance Rick Sanchez has decided to maintain in exchange for being left alone. Rick and Morty first aired on December 2nd, 2013 on Adult Swim. It was created by Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon. The pitch is simple. A genius scientist grandfather and his anxious teenage grandson go on adventures across space and time. That description is accurate and almost completely misleading. The way that a man goes to sea is an accurate and almost completely misleading description of Moby Dick. The surface of Rick and Morty is irreverent animated science fiction. The interior is a long, careful, quietly devastating study of one character who decided to make grief into an identity and intelligence into a weapon. The show opens in the middle of the night. Rick bursts into Morty's bedroom, drunk, holding a portal gun, ranting about a plan involving a bomb and a saucer and wiping out humanity. It is played as absurdism. Rick wakes up. It was a dream. But before a single episode properly gets underway, before any adventure begins, the show has already done something specific. It introduced Rick Sanchez at his most chaotic, his most alarming, in the private hours of the night, staggering toward the one person in his life he is consistently there for. Before any real dialogue lands, you already know where Rick goes when he has nowhere else to go. He goes to Morty's room. That is not an accident. The entire series operates this way. It hides its emotional architecture inside noise. For the first season, Rick Sanchez is defined almost entirely by what he claims about himself. He says he does not care about anything. He says the universe is without meaning, that human sentiment is a chemical illusion driven by evolutionary programming, that love is nothing but biology tricking meat into reproducing. He delivers these positions with the confidence of a man who has thought very carefully about how to sound like he has stopped thinking. And for a while, the show lets you believe him. He is reckless in ways that have real consequences. He drags Morty into situations that are genuinely dangerous, that leave psychological marks, that no responsible adult would allow. He drinks constantly. He treats almost everyone around him with casual contempt. He seems, on the surface, like a very smart man who has decided that his intelligence exempts him from ordinary human obligations. The fan theories started almost immediately. Somewhere between the premiere and the second episode, people started noticing discrepancies. Rick's behavior does not track with someone who genuinely does not care. If you do not care about a person, you do not take them with you everywhere. You do not react with barely suppressed urgency when they are in danger. You do not choose, repeatedly and without narrative necessity, to be in this specific dimension with this specific family when infinite alternatives are sitting in your portal gun. The argument that Rick secretly cares is so well supported by on-screen evidence that calling it a theory almost overstates how speculative it is. It is more like an observation the show decided not to have Rick confirm. The first real piece of evidence comes in Season 1, Episode 11, an episode called Ricksy Business. The episode is mostly a house party and some time crystal complications, the kind of chaos Rick generates the way other people generate small talk. But Bird Person is at the party, and Bird Person matters. He is Rick's oldest surviving friend, possibly the person who has known Rick longest, certainly one of the few people still alive who knew Rick before the performance began. And Bird Person tells Morty what Wubba Lubba Dub Dub means. This is Rick's catchphrase. He says it constantly, in good times and bad, when things go well, and when they go catastrophically wrong, when he is being triumphant, and when he is being chaotic. The audience has heard it across most of Season 1 and read it as pure noise, verbal static, the kind of invented phrase that functions as a character signature. And Bird Person translates it. In his species language, he explains, "Those sounds mean, I am in great pain, please help me." The translation lands differently depending on when you first encounter it and how much of the series you have already seen. Watching it for the first time in sequence, at episode 11 of Season 1, it reads as a clever dark joke, an ironic twist buried in character texture. But after you have watched the full arc, after you know about Diane and the portal bomb and Rick Prime and the suicide attempt and the hollow victory and Rick's deepest fear manifested inside a terror hole, the translation reads like the most honest thing the show ever said about its protagonist. Every time Rick said those words, every time the people around him laughed or shrugged or treated it as absurdist noise, Rick was confessing in a language nobody present could hear. The show tells you this in episode 11 and then lets you keep watching as if it did not. Season 1, episode 6, Rick Potion number 9, is where the show first breaks the rules it appeared to be playing by. The setup is ordinary by the show's standards. Morty has a crush on a girl named Jessica and asks Rick for a love potion. Rick makes one. The potion bonds with a flu virus circulating at the school dance and spreads to everyone in the building, which then spreads further, until the entire human population of Earth is in a state of manic fixation on Morty. Rick tries to fix it. His first fix turns everyone into mantis people. He tries again. The second fix mutates everyone into grotesque biological hybrids the show calls Cronenbergs, named after body horror filmmaker David Cronenberg. Earth is now catastrophically uninhabitable. The family is protected by a containment gas Rick had prepared, but the rest of humanity is gone in any functional sense. Rick's solution is to check the multiverse for a parallel dimension where he solved the outbreak successfully. He finds one. In that dimension, Rick and Morty died shortly afterward in an unrelated lab accident. Rick and Morty portal there, wait until the family is out, dig up their own doubles in the backyard, and move in. They take over the identities of the versions of themselves who just died. The episode ends here. The lawn is dug up. The bodies are buried. Morty cries briefly in the backyard, staring at a grave with his own name on it. Rick tells him this kind of thing happens. They go inside. The next episode starts somewhere else. This is the moment that separates Rick and Morty from almost everything else in animated television. What the show just did is eliminate its own premise without announcement. The Rick and Morty the audience had been watching from the beginning are dimensional refugees. Their original world still exists somewhere, Cronenberged and ruined. The Rick and Morty the show follows from this point forward are living in a dimension that is not theirs, inside identities that were not theirs, as unannounced replacements for people who died. And the ease with which Rick handles it, the practiced calm of the whole procedure, implies he has done something like this before. The multiverse in this show is not a toy. It has real weight and permanent consequences. The show establishes this in episode 6 of its first season, and it is the structural foundation for almost everything that follows. A theory emerged around this episode and stayed alive for several seasons, suggesting that Rick had been doing this his whole life. That Rick C-137 is a label that has accumulated through layers of substitution, that the numbering might have long since lost its original reference. There is a darker version of the same idea, that no dimension is ever really home for Rick, that he moves through realities the way someone moves through hotel rooms, because the home he actually wants is gone, and no copy can replace it. The show does not directly confirm either version. What it eventually establishes, across seasons 5 and 6, is that C-137 is specifically Rick's birth dimension, the one where Diane and young Beth lived and died. The man the show follows is from there, but the episode's emotional weight remains permanent. From this point forward, the Rick and Morty you are watching are living borrowed lives, and the world they left behind turns out to matter enormously to the show's backstory. Season 1, Episode 10, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, introduces two of the most important elements in the entire series in the same episode, without making either one feel like a dramatic announcement. The first is the Citadel of Ricks. The second, hidden at the episode's end, is Evil Morty. The Citadel is a trans-dimensional city-state, a massive constructed reality populated by Rick and Morty variants from across infinite realities. It has its own economy, its own police force, its own class hierarchy. Ricks run things. Mortys are marginalized, used as assistants and labor and treated as inherently less than. It is immediately readable as a satire of how intelligence gets weaponized into hierarchy, but in Season 1, it mostly functions as a setting and a way to establish scale. The episode's plot is that someone is killing Ricks across the multiverse, 27 confirmed murders, and kidnapping Mortys and using them in a disturbing neural installation. Rick C-137 is framed as the killer. He and Morty have to escape the Citadel's pursuit and find the real culprit. The apparent villain is a Rick with an eye patch, immediately identifiable as the evil one by genre convention. Rick finds him. The Citadel performs an autopsy, and the autopsy reveals a receiver implanted in evil Rick's brain. He was being remote controlled. The camera cuts to a Morty in a crowd of Mortys being released from where they were held captive. This Morty reaches up calmly and removes an eye patch from his own face. He drops it. He crushes the transmitter. He walks back into the crowd of freed Mortys as the Citadel watches them all go free. The audience sees it. The Citadel does not catch him. Evil Morty used a Rick as a remote-controlled puppet to conduct a murder campaign across the multiverse. He infiltrated the most powerful Rick-run organization in existence, accomplished his goal, and walked back out undetected. In Season 1. The show then filed that away for 3 years, and I still find that patience genuinely astonishing. Most animated comedies would not sit on a payoff that heavy for 3 episodes, let alone 3 seasons. Whoever pitched that in the writer's room understood something rare about how a slow burn actually works, and how much respect that shows for an audience that might not even be watching that closely yet. During Rick's interrogation in this same episode, a memory montage plays from a scanner attached to his head. It shows Rick's history with Morty. Years of moments from Morty's childhood, Rick present for ordinary afternoons, for quiet moments, for things that were not adventures and did not need to be. Rick, watching the montage play back involuntarily, tears up. The Citadel official notices and asks about it. Rick shuts it down immediately, pivots the scene somewhere else. The moment lasts approximately 5 seconds and is never directly referenced again. It is one of the most cited pieces of evidence for Rick's private emotional state. What the show is showing you is Rick's internal record of Morty, stored in his own memory, played back without warning, producing an uncontrolled emotional response that Rick suppresses the instant he is observed. The word theory feels almost too uncertain for what the show is demonstrating here. Rick is presented not as possibly caring about Morty, but as caring about Morty so consistently that his own memories break his composure in public, and he responds by becoming more controlled immediately. The performance goes back on, but you saw what was under it. The brainwave mechanic introduced here becomes a locus of debate across the series. Rick explains that Morty's brainwaves, described as low intelligence, cancel out Rick's genius-level brainwaves and create a natural camouflage against Rick detection technology. Officially, this makes Morty a biological accessory Rick carries for practical concealment. The problem with that reading is that it does not explain Rick's actual behavior. If Morty were purely a camouflage system, any Morty from any dimension would serve the purpose equally well. But Rick keeps choosing this specific Morty. He returns to this specific family. He engineers elaborate workarounds in situations where losing Morty is a real possibility. The gap between Rick's stated reason for keeping Morty around and how he actually behaves toward Morty is one of the most consistent things in the show. Season 2, Episode 3, Autoerotic Assimilation, aired on August 9, 2015. It follows Rick reuniting with Unity, a hive mind entity he was romantically involved with before the show's present narrative begins. Unity is a parasite by biology, an organism that assimilates beings by controlling their nervous systems. But in the context of Rick's history with it, the relationship is presented as genuine. Rick loved Unity. Unity's departure letter, found by Rick while Unity is still controlling a planet nearby, is one of the more precise descriptions of Rick's damage the show offers. The letter says his toxic influence amplifies destructive impulses in those around him, that she loves him and cannot be near him, that his gravity bends everything toward chaos. Rick returns home. He goes to his garage, he drinks, he encounters an alien creature in distress and puts it out of its misery. And then he sets up a device, aims it at his own head, and the camera holds on him long enough for no ambiguity to survive. This is Rick attempting to end his own life. He passes out from alcohol before it fires. The laser swings past him and vaporizes some paint cans on a shelf. The scene plays over a track called "Do You Feel It" by Chaos Chaos, a mournful, slow-building piece of music that carries almost all the emotional weight by itself. The sequence is shot with genuine cinematic care. It is not played for laughs. It has no punchline. The camera does not cut away early to spare the audience. It stays in what functions as a long, slow, unflinching look at the person underneath the performance, and what that person is doing alone in his garage late at night after someone who loved him left again. This is one of the most studied scenes in the show's history. It deserves to be, because it is doing something very specific. It is not just depicting depression, though it is doing that with more honesty than most prestige dramas manage. It is establishing the relationship between Rick's nihilism and his actual capacity for pain. Rick claims not to care about anything. This scene demonstrates that Rick cares so much and has been hurt so often and so completely that when his capacity for numbness fails, there is nothing left between him and the abyss. His alcohol, his nihilism, his performance of indifference, all of it is armor. And when Unity takes the armor with her, what is underneath is this garage and this late night and a man with no other mechanism left. The significance of this scene deepens with every season that follows. Every piece of backstory the show eventually confirms about Diane and Rick Prime and the decades between reads backward into this moment. Rick's alcoholism is not a personality quirk. It is the only coping mechanism he has found that works at scale. It is how he survives the gap between the life he had and the life he is inside now. Total Recall, the fourth episode of Season 2, is a lighter piece built around a puzzle box premise. Alien parasites multiply by implanting false positive memories, creating fictional characters who seem to have always been part of the family. Rick locks down the house to contain the infection. The key to identifying the parasites is that they can only create positive memories. Real relationships also include painful ones. If you can only recall good things about someone, they are probably a parasite. The significance for Rick is pointed. The family runs the test. They can identify Rick as real because they have genuine difficult memories of him, real arguments, real moments of hurt, real things they would prefer not to remember. The show is confirming, in a roundabout way, that Rick's presence in this family is genuine. His effect on them is real, which means their relationship to him is real, which means whatever they feel about him, including the complicated parts, is earned. It is a strange proof of belonging, that someone is real because they have hurt you in ways only real people can. But in this show, it holds up. The Season 2 finale, The Wedding Squanchers, ends with a sequence the show passes by quickly, but that defines Rick more clearly than most of his adventure plots. Rick's old friend Bird Person has just been shot dead at his own wedding by his wife, who is revealed to be a Galactic Federation agent. Rick, having just watched his closest friend die in front of him, does not fight or run or execute a clever escape. He turns himself in to the Galactic Federation, voluntarily, in front of his family, in exchange for what the episode implies is their safety. He hands over his portal gun. He is taken into custody. The family is sent back to Earth, now under Federation occupation. The season ends there. Rick, who has spent 2 seasons aggressively maintaining the position that he does not care about anything, just gave himself up for the people he claims not to care about. No speech about it, no dramatic moment where he makes sure they understand what he is sacrificing. He turns himself in quietly, and the season ends. The show does not return to it until the Season 3 premiere. This is the part of early Rick and Morty that stays with me. The show gives you all of this: the sacrifice, the tears over Morty's memories in the Citadel, the suicide attempt, the the translation of the catchphrase, and then it lets Rick put his mask back on every single time and walk back into the next episode performing the nihilism again. He never brings it up. He never acknowledges the accumulation. The performance is consistent. What the show is demonstrating is Rick's most practiced skill, which is not portal travel or chemistry or weapons design. It is compartmentalization. The ability to feel everything and then close every door and keep moving as if the doors were never open. Season 3 does something the show had been building toward and then actively resisted. It starts answering questions. Season 3, Episode 1 is called The Rick Shank Redemption. It aired on April 1st, 2017, not in the show's regular schedule. Adult Swim dropped it at midnight as a surprise. No announcement, no preview campaign. A prank that turned out to be one of the most significant episodes in the series' run. The regular Season 3 run began on July 30th of the same year, but the premiere had already changed the conversation. The episode opens with Rick in a Galactic Federation maximum security prison, inside a simulation designed to extract his secrets. The Federation agent running the simulation is named Cornelius Daniel. He is enthusiastic, a little arrogant, and entirely unprepared. Rick is cooperative in a way that should alarm anyone who knows anything about him. Rick shows Cornelius Daniel a memory. A younger Rick is in a garage. A portal opens in the air, and another Rick steps through, wearing sunglasses, carrying plans for an interdimensional portal gun. This visiting Rick tries to recruit young Rick into a network of interdimensional travelers. Young Rick refuses. He is happy, he says. He has a wife named Diane. He has a daughter named Beth. He does not want anything the other Rick is selling. The visitor, stung by the refusal, leaves. And then a portal opens in the floor of Rick's living room, and a device drops through and detonates. Diane and young Beth die. Rick holds Diane. Rick grieves. And then, alone in his garage, Rick builds the portal gun himself. From nothing. From memory and devastation and rage. The memory is the first time the show gives Rick a genuine interior life on screen. Not implied, not hinted at through behavior. A real backstory, a wife, a daughter, a before the entire rest of the show has been a response to. And then Rick tells Cornelius Daniel the whole thing was fabricated. A planted false memory designed to allow Rick to infiltrate the simulation systems and pull the Federation's master code. He uses that code to collapse the Galactic Federation's economy by zeroing out their currency. He simultaneously uses the Citadel as a weapon, colliding it with Federation headquarters and eliminating the Council of Ricks from inside the simulation. He destroys both major power structures governing the multiverse in the span of one escape sequence. He walks home. The season begins. The fandom split cleanly and immediately. Half the audience believed Rick. If Rick says it was fabricated, and Rick is the most capable person in any room he enters, and Rick clearly had an escape plan running the entire time, then the backstory was a tactical invention. A manipulator of his caliber would absolutely invent a dead wife if a dead wife served a purpose. The nihilist who claims nothing matters would not be revealed to have had something that mattered more than anything. The other half believed the memory. They pointed to the performance. If the memory was entirely fabricated, there was no reason for it to be as emotionally detailed as it was. No reason for the grief in the garage to play the way it played. No reason for Rick's anger to feel like something he was trying to control rather than something he was executing. The argument was that Rick used a real memory as the core of the trap. The emotional truth was genuine. The tactical exploit repurposed it. The backstory was real. Only the exact framing around when Rick solved the portal gun formula was adjusted. This debate ran for 2.5 years. 2 full seasons during which the show neither confirmed nor denied. Dan Harmon said in interviews during this period that the backstory was real, but that the show was not ready to impose canon on itself at that stage. The ambiguity was deliberate. And the ambiguity was itself a demonstration of how effectively Rick had trained everyone around him, including the audience, in his most fundamental behavior. You do not know what to believe about Rick, because Rick does not let you know what to believe about Rick. That is the operating principle of his entire life. Midway through Season 3, the episode Rest and Ricklaxation delivers what functions as a cross-section of Rick Sanchez. Rick and Morty undergo a detoxification process that physically separates their toxic attributes from their functional selves. Both versions exist simultaneously as separate individuals. Both are conscious. Both act according to what the process has left them. Rick's toxic half is not aggressive or cruel. Those qualities remain in the non-toxic version, apparently judged to be functional. What Rick's toxicity contains, what the process isolates and externalizes as the thing requiring removal, is emotional pain, longing, neediness, the terror of being alone. The toxic half is desperate and clingy and terrified in ways that Rick's exterior never allows through. The healthy Rick without his toxic half is efficient and cold in a way that functions perfectly and feels completely hollow. The episode frames both versions as Rick, neither one as the true or false self, but the implication is clear. Rick's suffering and his capacity for genuine connection are not two separate things. They are the same thing. Remove the pain and you remove the ability to love. Rick keeps the toxicity, keeps the pain locked inside, because the alternative is becoming something that cannot feel anything at all. This is the episode the show uses to give you the internal anatomy of Rick Sanchez. His exterior coldness is a real consequence of a choice he made about which parts of himself to suppress. He suppressed the parts that could be hurt, because those parts had been hurt beyond what they could survive intact. And the cost of that suppression is that those same parts are the ones capable of being moved, of caring, of connecting. He does not have them turned off, he has them locked. The toxic half, wandering around and making a mess of everything, proves they are still there. Season 3, Episode 7 is called The Ricklantis Mix-Up in promotional materials and Tales from the Citadel in the episode itself. It is the series' best episode by almost any measure used to evaluate it. Its rating on IMDb is 9.8 out of 10. It functions as a standalone anthology set entirely on the rebuilt Citadel of Ricks, following 4 parallel storylines about Citadel residents who are not the main characters. Rick and Morty appear only briefly to set up a trip to Atlantis, which the episode uses as a misdirect for its actual content. The 4 stories are a cop drama between an idealistic Rick and a corrupt Rick paired together on the Citadel's police force, a student adventure where a group of young Mortys seek a mythical wishing portal that turns out to be a garbage disposal, a factory subplot where a Rick named J22, who has spent years at a facility that harvests neurochemicals from a single Rick's permanent happy memory, goes on a rampage after being passed over for promotion, and a political storyline where a Morty runs for Citadel president on a platform of reform and grassroots representation. The episode is about power, what it does to systems, how it replicates, how the people at the bottom of any hierarchy learn to internalize its values, and how even the most rebellious members of a compressed class can find themselves maintaining the structure they believed they were fighting. The cop Morty, who seemed idealistic, turns out to be the most dangerous person in that storyline. The factory Rick, who went on a rampage, was responding to genuine injustice and accomplished nothing except to let the system identify and remove him. The student Mortys who found their wishing portal found a garbage chute and called it paradise, because the alternative was acknowledging how little the system was ever going to give them. And then there is the presidential candidate Morty. He wins the election. The camera cuts to him in his new office, alone. He reaches up and removes something from his eye, an eye patch. The music that plays is For the Damaged Coda by Blonde Redhead, the same piece used over the original Evil Morty reveal in Season 1, Episode 10. Evil Morty won the presidency of the Citadel from the inside, 3 years after his first appearance, and almost no one saw it coming. The show had been sitting on that for 3 years. The musical callback is how it tells you without saying a word. Late in the 3rd season, the ABCs of Beth opens a thread about Rick's relationship with his daughter that the show handles with unusual precision. Beth visits a dimension called Fruppyland, which Rick built for her as a child. The apparent story is that it was a loving gift, an entire magical dimension created by a genius father for a little girl who wanted magic. The real story, revealed once Beth and Rick are inside and talking honestly, is more complicated. Young Beth was violent and frightening, a child who terrorized other children in ways that alarmed everyone around her. Rick's response to having a dangerous, difficult child acting out for his attention, was not to be present. It was to build her a dimension she could disappear into. Fruipyland is a containment solution dressed up as a present. Rick built his daughter a prison and called it a playground. Beth's theory about her own childhood, voiced out loud in the episode, is that she was acting out to get her absent father's attention, and Rick responded by giving her somewhere wonderful to be that was not with him. The episode holds both things simultaneously, without collapsing one into the other. Rick loved Beth enough to build her an entire world. He also used that world to avoid dealing with her. Both things are true. The clone situation at the episode's end, where Rick offers Beth the choice to have a clone replace her so she can leave freely, becomes one of the series' most enduring, unresolved questions. Rick scrambles the identities of the real Beth and the clone in the season finale, confirming through his own deliberate action that neither the audience, the characters, nor Rick himself knows which Beth is real. The show has locked in a permanent ambiguity, not through narrative accident, but through Rick's specific choice to make the question unanswerable. The fan reading of this is hard to argue with. Rick made the identities unresolvable on purpose because he could not bear to know. If you know which Beth is real, you know which Beth is not. And Rick Sanchez, who has been operating for decades under the principle that he has already lost everything he loved, cannot afford to choose which of two daughters to grieve. Season 5 arrives, having kept the question of Rick's backstory deliberately suspended for 2 full seasons after the Season 3 premiere. And in its first episode, Mort Dinner Rick Andre, the show does something characteristically oblique. It does not confirm the backstory directly, it confirms it through Rick's furious refusal to have it confirmed. Mr. Nimbus is introduced here, Rick's oldest nemesis, a character from before the show's narrative begins, someone who knew Rick when Rick was a different person. The episode is largely a comedy of manners, about a dinner party gone wrong and the geopolitical implications of an undersea kingdom. But the significant moment is brief and buried in an exchange played for laughs. Mr. Nimbus says the name Diane. He implies, through a rhetorical question about what she would think if she were alive, that she has died. Rick's response to having Diane named out loud is furious. The exact wording is too direct for this format, but the intent is unmistakable. Rick tells Mr. Nimbus not to establish canonical backstory in his presence. The line is a joke about metafiction, the show winking at its own reluctance to lock down its own history. But the emotional content is not a joke. Rick is angry because Diane is real and the name costs him something every time it is said by someone who does not understand what it costs. If Diane were a fabrication invented in a simulation, the name would provoke nothing. You do not get furious at someone for referencing your invented dead wife. The anger is the confirmation, and Mr. Nimbus's phrasing confirms she is gone. The show has now told you, through a villain's casual reference and a protagonist's livid reaction, that Diane Sanchez was real and is dead. It did this in the middle of an episode about an undersea king, disguised as a meta-joke. Season 5, Episode 10, Rick Mirai Jack, aired on September 5, 2021. It is the episode that closes the 2.5-year debate about whether the backstory was real. It is also, arguably, the most structurally important episode in the series' run to that point. Rick's full origin is confirmed. The sequence plays straight, without the framing of a simulation or the possibility of fabrication. Rick C-137 was a young inventor in his dimension, married to Diane Sanchez, with a daughter named Beth. He was content with that life. Another Rick came to his dimension and offered portal technology and the life that came with it. Rick C-137 refused. The other Rick, wounded by the rejection, sent a portal bomb through to Rick's dimension. It killed Diane and Beth in their home. Rick C-137 grieved. And then, independently, without help or instruction, from devastation rather than from any teacher, he built his own portal gun. This makes him the only Rick other than the Rick who killed Diane, who the show later identifies as Rick Prime, to have independently invented interdimensional portal travel from scratch. Every other Rick in the Citadel received their portal gun from Rick Prime, who invented it first and distributed it. Rick C-137 reverse-engineered it from nothing, driven by grief and the need to find the man who murdered his family. He then spent decades hunting Rick Prime across the multiverse. He killed Ricks who were not the right one. He left devastation across dimensions looking for the right dimension. The surviving Ricks, facing Rick C-137 as an existential threat, eventually banded together. Rick C-137 joined that coalition, and he designed the central finite curve as part of the arrangement. The central finite curve is perhaps the most significant piece of world building in the series. It is a constructed barrier, engineered by Rick C-137, in cooperation with what became the Citadel, that separates a portion of the accessible multiverse from the rest of infinite existence. Specifically, it separates every dimension where Rick is the smartest being alive from every dimension where Rick is not. Every dimension accessible through a Citadel portal gun is a dimension where Rick dominates. The infinite multiverse beyond the curve contains dimensions where Rick is not the smartest, where other kinds of intelligence or power exceed his, where he does not automatically win. Those dimensions are inaccessible to Citadel technology by design. Rick built a wall around the subset of existence where he is always in control. This is one of the most devastating pieces of information the show ever delivers about Rick Sanchez, and it delivers it as a plot revelation in a season finale. Rick's claim to being the smartest being in the universe is not a statement of fact. It is the result of a system he designed to make it true by eliminating every dimension where it would not be true. The smartest man in the universe is the smartest man in a curated selection of universes that he personally curated. He told himself he was the best and then built a cage around every reality that would have contradicted him. The argument that this makes Rick a coward is one of the more interesting readings in the fandom, and it is an argument I find genuinely persuasive. Rick, who has spent the show performing indifference to everything, who claims that meaning is an illusion and that nothing matters, has constructed the single largest control mechanism in fictional history. He controls which realities are accessible. He controls the terms of engagement. He rigged the game and then performed superiority within the rigged game. Evil Morty sees this clearly. Evil Morty is the one who names it without saying it directly, through the act of escape. Evil Morty's plan in Season 5, Episode 10, is the culmination of everything the show has been building towards since Season 1. He obtains Rick C-137's brain scan and uses it to extract the Citadel's drive schematics, which he weaponizes. He sabotages all Citadel portal guns so that any Rick who tries to portal to safety is killed mid-transport. He destroys the Citadel. And then he breaks the central finite curve, opening a passage to the uncontrolled infinite multiverse beyond Rick's constructed boundary, and steps through in a gold portal, visually distinct from every green portal the audience has seen throughout the series. Evil Morty escapes. He escapes the curve. He escapes the system Rick built to guarantee Rick would always be on top. He steps into the part of the multiverse where Rick is not automatically the smartest thing in the room, and he does it voluntarily. His last image in Season 5 is of a boy stepping out of a golden door into something infinite and uncontrolled. He is not angry. He is not triumphant in a villainous way. He looks like someone who has just been released from a very large, very comfortable prison. Evil Morty's stated goal, confirmed through his actions across 3 seasons, is not revenge on Rick. It is not destruction for its own sake. It is freedom from the entire system Rick built. He does not want to kill Rick. He wants to live in a multiverse where Rick's dominance is not the organizing principle of everything, and the show does not frame this as straightforwardly wrong. The curve is Rick's. Rick built it. Evil Morty escaped something Rick designed to be inescapable. The show holds that ambiguity carefully and never resolves it into clean moral categories. Season 6, Episode 1, Soliloquies, aired on September 4, 2022. It is the episode that finally answers the dimension question the show had been deliberately obscuring since Season 1. An interdimensional reset at the episode's start sends all displaced travelers back to their universes of origin. This mechanism sorts out the geography of the show's multiverse. Rick is sent back to dimension C-137, his birth dimension. Morty is sent back to what the show calls the prime dimension, which is actually the Cronenberg's dimension from Season 1, Episode 6, the dimension they abandoned after the potion outbreak, the dimension where Morty grew up before the present-day narrative begins. And that dimension, the Cronenberged one, turns out to be Rick Prime's native dimension. Rick Prime was born there. Rick Prime was Morty's biological grandfather by blood, the actual Rick who belonged to Morty's family by birth. Rick C-137 is not Morty's biological grandfather. He is a surrogate, a substitute, a Rick who settled in Morty's dimension after his own was destroyed, specifically because Rick Prime had abandoned that dimension's Beth and left the family without a Rick. Rick C-137 chose a family that Rick Prime had left behind. He filled a vacancy Rick Prime created by being the kind of person who abandons his family. This recontextualizes the entire show. The central relationship, the one between Rick and Morty, is between a man and a boy who share no biological connection, who found each other in the wreckage of Rick Prime's abandonment. Rick C-137 came to Morty's dimension because it was the dimension that needed a Rick, and because its Rick was the man who killed Diane. The personal was inseparable from the practical. Rick chose this family, specifically, and it was not random. What Solarix also reveals about Dimension C-137 is one of the most emotionally loaded pieces of information in the show's entire history. Rick did not just leave C-137, he set it in a time loop. He trapped the neighborhood in an infinite repetition of the day Diane and Beth died, returning to the moment of the explosion again and again, endlessly. He built a house in C-137, in his old neighborhood, with an artificial intelligence inside it programmed to sound like Diane, a voice in the next room, perpetually present. The AI says things Diane would say. It is not sentient. It is a recording given a responsive architecture. Rick made a ghost and visited it. At the end of Solarix, Rick finds this house and destroys or deactivates the Diane AI. He does it deliberately. The act is framed as Rick choosing to move forward rather than remaining inside the grief monument he built for himself. It is one of the few moments in the series where Rick consciously dismantles one of his own defenses rather than adding to them. The rest of Season 6 builds toward confrontation with Rick Prime. Rick Prime appears in the post-credits scene of the season premiere, shown on a space station in the Cronenberg dimension, where he kills the Cronenberged version of Jerry in a casual, efficient way that establishes his capacity for violence and his complete indifference to collateral damage. This is Rick Prime's first active, present-day on-screen appearance. He had only been seen before in flashbacks. He is immediately, recognizably different from Rick C-137. He does not perform indifference. He does not wear armor. He is genuinely indifferent, in the way that Rick C-137's toxic half in Rest and Ricklaxation is genuinely devoid of warmth. Rick Prime is what Rick C-137 would be if you removed everything that still cares. Justin Roiland, before his departure from the show, described Rick Prime as devoid of empathy. The distinction from Rick C-137 matters, and the show is careful to keep it precise. Rick C-137 suppresses empathy. He locks it away, manages it, deploys it in secret, and then covers the evidence. Rick Prime has no such suppression to perform because there is nothing to suppress. He is not a damaged person keeping himself together. He is an absence that learned to be productive. Two very different things. Season 6 builds across its run toward what should be the confrontation and ends by teasing it without delivering it. Dan Harmon spoke about the deliberate decision to stretch the Rick Prime arc across Season 6 and into Season 7. The point was not just to deliver the confrontation. The point was to be prepared for what comes after. Before Season 7 begins, the show changes in a way that would have been unthinkable from the outside. Justin Roiland, who co-created the show and provided both Rick's and Morty's voices from the pilot onward, departed from the series. In January of 2023, NBC News reported on charges that had been filed against Roiland in Orange County, California, in May of 2020. The charges were 1 felony count of domestic battery with corporal injury and 1 felony count of false imprisonment. Roiland had pleaded not guilty. On January 24th of 2023, Adult Swim officially severed ties with Roiland and confirmed the show would continue with new voice actors. Roiland had resigned from Squanch Games, the video game studio he founded, several days prior. In March of 2023, the Orange County District Attorney's Office dismissed all charges against Roiland, citing insufficient evidence. Adult Swim did not reverse its decision. Additional allegations of predatory behavior involving minors had emerged in the interim, compounding the situation beyond the scope of the original legal proceedings. The show moved forward without him. The new voice actors debuted in Season 7, Episode 1 on October 15, 2023. Ian Cardoni now voices Rick Sanchez. Harry Belden now voices Morty Smith. Both are working actors with credits across television. The two reportedly did not meet in person until they were already partway through their first recording season together. The critical reception of the voice swap was broadly positive among professional critics. Rolling Stone's Alan Sepinwall wrote that the voices were virtually indistinguishable from the originals. Season 7 has a Metacritic score of 73 out of 100. The audience reception was more complicated. Rotten Tomatoes' audience score started near 33%, a figure almost certainly driven by organized review bombing from audiences opposed to the recasting on principle rather than on the quality of the product. Season 7, Episode 5, Unmortrican, aired on November 12, 2023. It was written by Albro Lundy and James Siciliano and directed by Jacob Hare. Dan Harmon described it in interviews as an episode that would have been a series finale on many shows. He placed it at episode 5 of 10 deliberately as a mid-season gut punch, so that the show would then have to deal with what comes after the thing everyone had been waiting for. What everyone had been waiting for is Rick killing Rick Prime. Rick and Morty track Rick Prime across dimensions. They find him. Rick Prime finds them. All three are captured by Rick Prime, who has the resources and intelligence to manage that particular situation. And then Evil Morty arrives. Evil Morty, living somewhere outside the central finite curve, comes back in. Evil Morty's full backstory plays in flashback in this episode. The accumulation of betrayals and experiences that led him from being an ordinary Morty to the person who remote-controlled a Rick in Season 1, who won the Citadel Presidency in Season 3, who broke the curve in Season 5. The backstory is shown without completely resolving the question of whether this Morty was Rick C-137's original Morty, the one he was with before the present-day narrative of the show begins. The show strongly implies it. It does not lock it in. Evil Morty systematically dismantles Rick Prime's defenses. He deactivates Rick Prime's healing systems, his backups, his protections. He strips Rick Prime of every technological advantage, and then he steps aside and hands Rick C-137 a defenseless Rick Prime. What follows is described by critics as the most violent sequence in the show's history. Rick C-137 beats Rick Prime to death with his bare hands, not with a weapon or a clever device. With his hands, physically, in an extended sequence that does not cut away or aestheticize what is happening. Rick Prime taunts throughout. He laughs. He refuses to give Rick the catharsis of fear or remorse or acknowledgement. He dies without giving Rick anything at all, which is the final cruelty of a person who has spent decades knowing that the only thing he had to give Rick was his life, and choosing to make even that as hollow as possible. The scene leaves Rick in silence. He has killed Rick Prime, the lifelong purpose that has structured every decision he has made since Diane died. The purpose that gave him a reason to build the portal gun, and found the Citadel, and settle in Morty's dimension, and make himself the most dangerous person in the universe, is gone. He got what he wanted, and it felt like nothing, because the person whose death was supposed to make things make sense again refused, at the very end, to provide even that. Evil Morty leaves. Before he goes, he takes something. The Omega device is a weapon introduced earlier in Unmortrican, used by Rick Prime to erase Rick's uncle Slow Mobius from every universe simultaneously. All versions, across all realities, erased at once. It is the most final weapon in the show's mythology. Evil Morty departs with its schematics. He does not use it, he just takes the knowledge of its existence and returns to whatever his life outside the curve has become. Dan Harmon spoke about Unmortrican extensively in a Variety interview after the season aired. He described placing the resolution at mid-season as an intentional narrative decision. He talked about the show's writers wanting to deliver what he called the promised red meat, and about his own tendency to resist serialized canonical storytelling, and about overcoming that resistance specifically to honor what the show had been building. The aftermath of Rick Prime's death, he said, was itself the story. A character who has defined himself by revenge for decades, suddenly without the revenge that gave him structure. What is Rick Sanchez without Rick Prime to hunt? That is what Season 7's second half was built to begin exploring. The Season 7 finale, Fear No Mort, aired on December 17, 2023. It is the 71st episode of the series overall. It puts Rick and Morty inside a fear hole, a location that manifests a person's deepest fears in an immersive, difficult-to-escape form. Rick's deepest fear, the thing the fear hole creates for him, is losing Diane. He encounters a simulacrum of her inside the hole. He nearly stays there, consuming his own grief indefinitely in a pocket universe of imagined reunion. He chooses to leave, and after leaving, he hangs a photograph of Morty on the wall next to the fear hole. Not Diane's photograph, Morty's. The choice of which image he pins next to the thing that most represents his worst fear is not subtle. Morty has become Rick's anchor, not in the sense of grief being replaced by grief, but in the sense that the thing Rick holds onto when the fear hole is right there, the thing that is enough to keep him from going back in, is Morty. It is among the most direct emotional statements the show has made about this relationship. And the show delivers it in an episode about a hole in the ground that makes you hallucinate. Evil Morty does not appear in the Season 7 finale. He appears in Episode 5, and then not again for the rest of the season. Dan Harmon stated in the Variety interview following the finale that the show has plans and grand designs for Evil Morty in future seasons. He described this with the enthusiasm of someone holding a loaded narrative weapon and waiting for the right moment. Now that the canonical scaffolding is in place, it is worth spending time on the theories themselves. The arguments fans have been building and testing and revising across more than a decade of watching Rick Sanchez. The oldest and most persistent is the argument that Rick secretly cares, which, as noted earlier, is barely a theory in the strict sense. The evidence is extensive enough that calling it unconfirmed feels inaccurate, but it is worth cataloging comprehensively, because the show is deliberate about never having Rick confirm it directly. The proof exists only in accumulated behavior. Start with the brain scan montage in Season 1, Episode 10. Rick tears up watching years of Morty's life played back from his own memory. He immediately deflects when observed. The deflection is confirmation in itself. You do not need to suppress an emotion you are not feeling. Add the sacrifice. In Season 2, Episode 10, Rick turns himself in to the Galactic Federation without asking anyone to acknowledge what he is giving up. If it were a tactical move, he would have explained the tactic. He explains nothing. He simply goes. Add the suicide attempt in Season 2, Episode 3. Rick is in such pain that when his capacity for numbness fails, there is nothing left. If Rick genuinely felt nothing, this scene does not exist. The garage scene is possible only if there is something genuine underneath. Add the moment in Season 3 where Rick walks away from a conflict with the President of the United States to go play video games with Morty, not as a tactical withdrawal, because he prefers an afternoon with Morty to any high-stakes geopolitical situation. Add Season 5, Episode 1, where the name Diane produces uncontrolled fury in Rick. If the backstory were a fabrication, the name would provoke nothing. It provokes anger because it costs him something every time it surfaces. Add Season 7, Episode 10, where Rick's deepest fear is losing Diane, and he pins Morty's photograph on the wall next to the fear hole rather than going back inside. The fear hole contains what he most wants. He chooses not to be in it. He chooses to be here, where Morty is. The accumulated weight of all of this is not a theory in the sense of speculation. It is the show's actual argument about its protagonist, expressed through behavior rather than dialogue, because Rick refuses to express it through dialogue. The official position Rick holds is nihilism. The demonstrated behavior is deep, consistent, suppressed devotion to the people he claims not to care about. The show operates in the space between those two things and has been doing so since Episode 1. The Rick as villain protagonist argument is the mirror case. The evidence here is also real and also extensive. Rick has murdered people. He has destroyed dimensions. He has used others as tools and resources for his own purposes. He built a system of control that constrained the freedom of infinite realities for his own benefit. He kept Morty in genuinely dangerous situations for his own convenience. He built his daughter a prison and sold it to her as a gift. He is not absolved of the harm he does by the fact that his reasons for doing it are comprehensible. The harm is real even if the context for it is understandable. The counter-argument is that the show has never framed Rick as a hero. He is the protagonist. Those are different things. A protagonist is the person whose story you are inhabiting. A hero is someone who does what is right. Rick does what he needs to do, which often involves doing what is wrong, and the show is honest about that distinction. The question of whether Rick is a villain is one the show seems deliberately uninterested in answering, because it is more interested in why Rick is who he is than in whether he deserves judgment for it. The weaponized trauma reading is the one I find most directly persuasive, the argument most convincingly supported by the text of the show across its full run. The case is that Rick took his own grief and damage and deliberately converted them into operational assets. His nihilism is not a genuine philosophical position. It is a tool. If nothing matters, then you cannot be hurt by losing things, because there is nothing to lose. If intelligence is the only value, then the destruction of a loving relationship is not a tragedy but an inefficiency. Rick built a worldview that neutralized the specific vulnerabilities his grief created, and then he used that worldview to become the most dangerous and capable person in any room he entered. The support for this is in the central finite curve. Rick did not just become the smartest person in the universe. He engineered a system to guarantee it, to make his claim to superiority unchallengeable by design, to remove from accessibility every dimension where his claim might fail. That is not the behavior of someone who believes intelligence is ultimately meaningless. That is the behavior of someone so terrified of not being the smartest that they rebuilt the architecture of the multiverse to ensure they always would be. Rick's nihilism is the story he tells. His behavior is the truth, and the behavior says, this is a person who is extremely afraid and will take any action necessary to prevent the specific thing they are most afraid of from happening again. What Rick is most afraid of is being hurt the way he was hurt when Diane died. He spent decades operating without that vulnerability threatening him directly, because he converted it into a purpose. Kill Rick Prime. The purpose gave him structure. The structure held the fear at bay. And then Rick Prime died beaten to death by Rick's own hands at mid-season of Season 7, and the structure was gone. And what the show put on television in the following 5 episodes was the most honest question it has ever asked about Rick Sanchez. What does he do now? The Rickest Rick debate has no official answer, and I think that absence of resolution is itself the answer the show wanted to give. The debate was articulated publicly by the 2 men who created the character. Dan Harmon's position, stated in interviews with comicbook.com among other outlets, is that Rick C-137 is the Rickest Rick precisely because he has suffered most. The quality that makes a Rick on Harmon's reading is self-destruction, the willingness to do damage to yourself and everything around you as a response to a universe that has already done damage to you first. Rick C-137 is the most thoroughly self-destructive, the one who has grieved longest, the one who has compensated most violently for his own pain. He is the Rickest Rick because his damage runs deepest. Justin Roiland's counter-argument before his departure was that Rick Prime holds the title. If Rickest means most purely devoid of the emotional attachment that compromises efficiency, most completely liberated from the kind of caring that gets in the way of genius, then Rick Prime is the answer. He is what Rick C-137 would be without the grief, without the suppressed love, without the tears over Morty's memory scan. He is the endpoint of the trajectory. He is what Rick performs being, fully realized. Neither creator resolved the debate. It is open by design. And that open debate says something important about the character. Rick Sanchez is defined by a tension between what he is and what he performs being. And whether the performance or the reality underneath it constitutes the true self is a question the show refuses to answer. Because Rick does not know who he is under the armor. That is the point. The armor has been on so long that what it was originally protecting has changed beyond recognition, and Rick cannot take it off long enough to find out. The central finite curve as a metaphor for Rick's psychological architecture is an argument the fandom has been making since Season 5, Episode 10, and it is one of the most satisfying readings the show has produced. The curve is a wall Rick built around a curated portion of existence, the portion where he is always the smartest. Beyond it is infinite uncontrolled reality, which Rick cannot access because his own technology only works inside the boundary he set. Rick confined himself. He created a massive, multiverse-spanning closed system and called it sovereignty. And Evil Morty, the Morty who decided to escape, broke the wall and stepped outside, into the part of existence that Rick had declared inaccessible. The reading is that the curve is Rick's internal emotional architecture made physical and literal. He has walled off every part of existence that would challenge his control, every dimension where he is not the smartest, every reality where something outranks him, is inaccessible by design. He has done this internally for decades, locking away the parts of himself that could be hurt, keeping the performance intact, ensuring that his version of reality is one where he is always in command. The curve is the external, physical, multiversal version of what Rick does inside himself every day. And Evil Morty breaking it is the show asking, what would it look like for Rick to stop doing that? What is outside the walls he built? What has Rick been refusing to access? The question of what Rick's life becomes after Rick Prime's death is the most genuinely open thread the show is currently sitting on. Rick Prime structured decades of Rick's existence. Every choice Rick made, every capability he developed, every relationship he built, had Rick Prime somewhere underneath it as context and reason. Morty was chosen partly because Rick Prime's family lived in this dimension. The Citadel was founded as a consequence of Rick's hunt for Prime. The portal gun itself was built to find him. When Prime is gone, what is underneath is the grief that was there before Prime gave Rick something to do with it. Dan Harmon described the aftermath as the next story. Rick without a purpose, confronting what he actually is without the justification of a mission. Fear No Mort began that exploration. The show has always been most honest about Rick when it has removed the thing he was hiding behind. Evil Morty's future is the most genuinely speculative thread in the show's open questions, and the most interesting one. He has the Omega device schematics. He has freedom outside the curve. He is not aligned with Rick or against Rick in any simple way. He helped Rick destroy Rick Prime not from loyalty, but because killing Rick Prime served his own purposes, and because this specific Morty and this specific Rick, the show implies, have a history that makes the choice not entirely strategic. The fan theory that Evil Morty is Rick C-137's original Morty, the Morty he was traveling with before the present-day narrative of the show begins, is probably the most emotionally compelling, unconfirmed theory in the fandom. Season 7, Episode 5 strongly implies it in the flashback sequences. Evil Morty's backstory, shown in fragments, is consistent with a Morty who had a long and damaging history with a specific Rick, before deciding to break free of the entire system that Rick built. The mobile game Pocket Mortys places Rick C-137's original Morty in a specific dimension with its own identifier, adding a layer of ambiguity that the main show has not addressed. If Evil Morty is Rick C-137's original Morty, then the relationship between them is one of the most tragic things the show contains. Rick built the system. His original Morty, who was inside the system longer and more intimately than anyone, decided the system had to be destroyed. He rose through the Citadel, broke the curve, escaped, and then came back at the most crucial moment to deliver Rick Prime to Rick. Not out of love exactly, but out of something that is not entirely separate from it. The original Morty, if this reading is correct, watched Rick build a prison around the multiverse, understood it from the inside better than anyone, and chose freedom, and then chose, once, to do something for the Rick who built the prison, not reconciliation, something more complicated than that. The show is comfortable with complicated. Dan Harmon has confirmed plans for Evil Morty in future seasons, describing the show as having grand designs with the character without specifying what those designs are. What Evil Morty does with the Omega device schematics, whether he builds the weapon or stores it, or uses it on a specific target, is the largest unresolved piece of narrative the show is currently holding. A weapon that can erase any being from every universe simultaneously, in the hands of the most capable and independent Morty, who who has ever existed, operating freely outside the boundaries Rick constructed. The show put that combination together, and it is not finished with it yet. Season 8 aired from May 25th to July 27th of 2025. Ian Cardoni and Harry Belden had by this point completed 2 full seasons in the roles, and the conversation about the voice transition had largely settled into acceptance. Season 8 continued developing the threads opened in Season 7. The specifics of what it contained sit at the edge of what this video can speak to with full confidence, as detailed reresis of its plot developments was not fully available in the research that underpins this script. What can be stated is that the show continued to receive professional distribution and has been confirmed for renewal through at least Season 12, which would bring the run to approximately 2029 at current production pacing. Dan Harmon expressed in a renewal statement that the list of places to go remains effectively infinite, which is both a comment on the show's multiverse premise and a genuine creative position. "Nobody wants a universe without Rick and Morty," he said. Given what the show has built across 9 seasons and counting, the confidence is probably earned. Season 9 premiered on May 24th, 2026, which is the currently airing season at the time this video was made. What it will reveal about the open threads from Seasons 7 and 8, where Evil Morty surfaces next, what Rick without his revenge orientation becomes, across a full season's development. These are questions this video cannot answer, because the answers are still being aired. What this video can do is name what the show is still holding: Evil Morty and the Omega device, Rick's new identity or lack of one after Rick Prime, which Beth is real, what exists outside the curve in the part of the multiverse Rick never accessed, and whether the show will ever go there, whether the Cronenberg's dimension has more story left in it, whether the Diane AI's destruction in Season 6 means Rick is genuinely done with that chapter of grief, or whether the show will return to it, what Bird Person's death in the Galactic Federation storyline eventually means for Rick's history, given that Bird Person knew Rick before any of the show's narrative begins. These questions are in the show's future. The show has earned the right to take its time. The Rick is a future Morty theory deserves full treatment here, because it was one of the most widely circulated ideas in the show's early years, and because the way the show eventually addressed it reveals something important about how Rick and Morty thinks about its own mythology. The theory goes like this: Rick Sanchez is a future version of Morty Smith. At some point in the timeline, an adult Morty learned interdimensional travel, built a portal gun, traveled back to his own past, and taught himself portal technology as a young Morty, creating a bootstrap paradox. The logic points were notable for their time. Rick and Morty share speech patterns, the same stutter and the same verbal tics. Rick is protective of Morty in ways that could be explained by self-preservation. The show uses circular time travel in other episodes, making the mechanics plausible within the show's own rules. And there is a visual resemblance between certain depictions of young Rick and adult Morty, partly because they share a character design language built around a specific body type. It was a compelling theory in Seasons 1 and 2 because the show was still operating with relatively sparse canonical backstory. Rick's past was largely blank. The theory filled the blank with a narrative that explained the specific intensity of his relationship with Morty, his investment in the boy's survival, his consistent return to this specific dimension and this specific family. If Rick is a future Morty, then of course he cannot let Morty die. He would be erasing himself. The emotional logic held together if you were willing to ignore the show's actual content and treat the relationship as fundamentally self-interested. By Season 5, and especially by Season 6, the theory was not just unconfirmed. It was directly contradicted by everything the show had established. Rick has a confirmed birth dimension labeled C-137. He has a confirmed wife named Diane who lived and died there. He has a confirmed daughter named Beth who grew up in his household. He has a documented decades-long history as an adult, hunting Rick Prime across dimensions, founding the Citadel, settling in Morty's dimension by deliberate choice. None of this is compatible with Rick being a future version of Morty. Rick does not have a bootstrap origin. He has a linear, grief-saturated life history with real people in it who were real before the show's present-day narrative begins. What the theory's popularity revealed, though, is something worth sitting with. Audiences wanted Rick to have a concrete, personal reason for his attachment to Morty. The bootstrap theory was an attempt to supply one when the show had not yet done so. It was the fandom writing a backstory for a character because the show had not written it yet. And the backstory the show eventually provided was actually more emotionally substantial than the time loop version could have been. Rick chose Morty, not because Morty is a future version of himself, because Morty is the boy who lives in the family Rick Prime destroyed and then abandoned, because Rick C-137 could not leave that family without a Rick in it. He chose a family that Rick Prime threw away. That is not a time loop. That is grief finding a second use for itself. The relationship between Rick and Beth is one of the show's most carefully underexplored threads, and underexplored by design, because Rick is as defensive about Beth as he is about anything. The scraps the show provides about Rick as a father are consistently painful in a specific way. He built Fruppyland for her as a containment solution rather than a present. He offered her a clone and freedom from her own life, which is either the most loving or most negligent thing a parent could do depending on how you read it, and the show deliberately refuses to resolve which reading is correct. He scrambled the identities of the real and clone Beth so that he would never have to know which daughter he is looking at. He is, by any standard measure, a terrible father who loves his daughter enormously and cannot make those two things cohere. Beth became a large animal surgeon. The show does not explain the career choice in detail, but the trajectory of a gifted, brilliant, neglected child becoming a professional with power over life and death is not hard to read. Beth is her father's daughter in ways she might not fully recognize. She is defensive, emotionally guarded, contemptuous of weakness, drawn to admiration and resentful when she does not receive it. She chose a husband in Jerry who is almost pathologically non-threatening, who needs her in ways that give her the power her father never allowed her to feel as a child. The Rick-Beth dynamic produced Beth. Beth's parenting, shaped by what Rick did and did not give her, shaped Morty. The damage flows downward in this family across generations, and the show glimpses this without fully inhabiting it, which is probably accurate to how generational damage actually works. You see the outlines. You rarely see the whole picture. Rick's contempt for Jerry runs through the series as one of its most consistent tonal elements, and it is worth examining what it actually represents, rather than taking it at face value as character comedy. Rick chose this dimension, this specific family. Jerry comes with the family, and Jerry is, in almost every measurable way, Rick's opposite. He is weak where Rick is powerful. He is emotionally available where Rick is defended behind armor. He needs validation constantly, where Rick performs superiority. He is dependent on others in ways that make him vulnerable, where Rick projects absolute self-sufficiency. Rick treats Jerry with a contempt that occasionally feels personal, as though Jerry's existence is an affront to something specific rather than a general preference for competence. The reading that Rick hates Jerry, partly because Jerry represents a version of the contented small life Rick gave up, or rather the version that was taken from him, is one the show supports obliquely without ever making explicit. Rick was content before Diane died. He refused the other Rick's offer because he had what he needed. Jerry is a version of that contentment realized in its least admirable, most passive form. Jerry is happy with a small life and grateful for the ordinary things in it. Rick cannot be. Rick cannot be, because the small life he was content with was taken from him by force, and every reminder of that contentment in the form of Jerry Smith's face is a reminder of the before that no longer exists. Rick's disdain for Jerry is not just a character note, it is Rick recoiling from something he cannot afford to want. Rick's friendship with Bird Person illuminates something about who Rick was before the show's present-day narrative begins. In a way that the show handles with considerable restraint, Bird Person is introduced in Season 1 as Rick's oldest surviving friend. He is solemn and direct and carries himself with the weight of someone who has seen things and decided not to talk about most of them. He speaks without jokes. He translates Wubba Lubba Dub Dub without making it a punchline. He knows what it means because he knew Rick before the catchphrase was something Rick hid behind. The implication is that Bird Person knew Rick before the armor was fully assembled. He knew whatever Rick was before grief became the organizing fact of his existence. The Season 2 finale kills Birdperson at his own wedding. Rick watches it happen in front of him, and immediately, without fighting or escaping or implementing any of the dozens of plans he could obviously run in that situation, Rick surrenders. He turns himself in to the Galactic Federation. The speed of the decision, its completeness, the absence of any clever exit or tactical response, suggests that watching Birdperson die did something to Rick's capacity for resistance that no other single event in the show has accomplished. Losing the last person who knew him before is enough to make Rick simply stop. Stop running, stop fighting, stop performing. For a moment, in the Season 2 finale, Rick Sanchez just stops. It is one of the few times the show shows you exactly how much something has cost him. The show's treatment of intelligence as a sustained thematic element is more complicated than it first appears, and the complication is important. Rick's intelligence is presented as real and extraordinary. It is not satirized or revealed to be false. He does genuinely outthink everyone around him in almost every situation, but the show is quietly consistent about what that intelligence costs him, specifically, and what it cannot do for him that it might appear capable of doing. Rick is smart enough to see through almost every comforting illusion. He cannot unsee what he knows. He cannot choose to not understand the mechanism behind feelings he would prefer to experience naively. He knows, in a precise and rearistical sense, that love is a neurological process that evolved to serve reproductive and social bonding functions. He knows that meaning is constructed rather than inherent in things. He knows that the universe does not, in any verifiable sense, have a stake in his well-being or anyone else's. These are positions the show treats as accurate enough, defensible enough, that they are not simply written off as nihilistic error. But there is a specific kind of trap available to very intelligent people who have also been very badly hurt, and the trap is this. Intelligence, applied to grief, produces reresis. Reresis produces understanding. Understanding produces, in someone smart enough, the knowledge that the thing you lost cannot be replaced, that the absence is permanent, that the suffering is proportional to how real the love was, and will not simply decrease over time through ordinary cognitive processes. A less rearistical person might grieve and then, through the ordinary mental shortcuts that protect less rearistical people, gradually soften the memory, gradually reconstruct a livable present in which the past is painful but manageable. Rick cannot do that. He is too smart to let himself be fooled by the distortions that make grief survivable. His intelligence has immunized him against the ordinary human capacity to heal through some degree of misremembering, and the cost of that immunity is that the grief does not soften. It just gets older, it accumulates. This is what Dan Harmon was pointing toward when he said, in multiple interview contexts across the show's run, that Rick resists handing the reins of his emotional life to the universe. Rick cannot accept what happened to him as simply something that happened, that has no further meaning, that needs to be integrated and moved forward from. He has to do something with it. He has to convert it into purpose and intelligence and a project. The revenge arc against Rick Prime was Rick giving his grief a destination. The grief itself, underneath the project, never moved toward resolution. Rick Prime, as the show eventually positions him, represents the endpoint of the trajectory Rick has been attempting. He is what you get if you complete the journey Rick started after Diane died. A Rick who actually has no emotional attachment left, not suppressed, not locked away, simply absent, the way a fire is absent when it has finally consumed everything available to it and gone out. Rick Prime is efficient and capable in the way that Rick claims to be and performs being. He is genuinely free of the vulnerabilities that compromise performance. He should be, by Rick's own stated philosophy, the superior version. He is what Rick claims to want to be, and the show makes absolutely clear that Rick Prime is hollowness given a body. He is not liberated. He is empty. He is the cautionary tale at the end of every argument Rick makes about not caring. He is the proof that the destination Rick has been performing himself toward for decades is not freedom but absence. Rick, C-137, is kept from becoming Rick Prime by exactly the things he has been trying to get rid of. The grief, the suppressed devotion, the toxicity, the need. Remove those and you get Rick Prime. The toxicity is the humanity. The show makes this argument in Rest and Ricklaxation, and then confirms it by eventually giving Rick Prime an on-screen presence that makes the argument concrete. The Omega device, used by Rick Prime to erase slow Mobius from every universe simultaneously, is the most extreme expression of Rick Prime's philosophy made physical. You do not just kill someone, you eliminate all their versions, across all realities, permanently and completely. No copies, no alternatives, no parallel universe where they survived. You reach across the entirety of existence and unmake someone so thoroughly that the multiverse itself contains no record of them having ever been. That is Rick Prime's weapon. That is the tool he built when he turned his intelligence toward destruction without any counterweight of care to limit what he would do with it. Evil Morty, taking the Omega device schematics at the end of Unmortrican, is the show loading a weapon and putting it off screen. Whatever Evil Morty intends to do with that capability, the show has made very clear that he possesses the means for the most final kind of deletion available in the mythology. Fan theories have ranged across every possibility: that he will use it against a specific Rick who threatens him from outside the curve, that he will use it as a deterrent he never fires, that he will build it as insurance and destroy the schematics afterward, that he will target someone whose elimination from all universes is the final piece of a plan the show has not yet revealed. The show has not answered any of these. It has just made certain the audience knows the capability exists and who has it. The history of the Citadel, across the episodes that develop it, is worth examining as a complete argument, rather than as a series of plot points. The Citadel was founded partly as a consequence of Rick C-137's decades-long violence against other Ricks. The surviving Ricks organized against him as an existential threat. He joined the coalition and shaped it into the institution it became. The central finite curve was his design. In that sense, Rick did not just benefit from the Citadel's system, he built it. The system that marginalizes Mortys across infinite dimensions, that treats them as labor and camouflage and lesser beings, was designed in part by the Rick who supposedly cares about one specific Morty more than any other Rick ever cared about anything. This is the implication the show allows Evil Morty to address through actions rather than dialogue. Evil Morty does not just escape from the Citadel. He escapes from a system whose existence Rick C-137 is directly responsible for. The Mortys who are used and devalued and treated as inherently less than, across infinite versions of the Citadel, are inside a hierarchy Rick helped construct. Rick's care for one Morty did not produce any attempt to extend that care outward. To the Mortys, the Citadel was built to contain and use. Evil Morty noticed this. Evil Morty decided it was one more reason to burn the whole structure down. Season 3, Episode 7, Tales from the Citadel, develops this argument across 4 parallel stories with enough formal care that it functions as a complete statement independent of its context. The factory Rick named J-22 going on a rampage after being passed over for promotion is the most compressed and surreal of the 4 stories, but it is also the most structurally legible. The factory harvests neurochemicals from a single Rick who is maintained in a permanent state of his happiest memory, a Rick reduced to a biochemical resource for other Ricks' consumption. J-22's rage at being passed over is understandable. His rampage is legitimate in the way that someone acting against genuine injustice is legitimate, and it accomplishes nothing. The system absorbs the disruption, removes the disruption, and continues. This is the episode's argument about institutions. They are designed to process disruption. Individual rebellion is one of the functions they have already accounted for. The student Mortys finding the wishing portal and discovering it is a garbage chute is the most formally elegant sequence in the episode. They have built an entire mythology around a waste disposal mechanism. They have assigned meaning to it, believed in it, died for it. And the last Morty left standing, who sees what it actually is, has to decide whether to tell the others or let the myth survive. The episode does not give you the resolution. It cuts away at the moment of decision, leaving the choice to the viewer's imagination, because the interesting thing is not the answer. The interesting thing is the question. Is it better to live in a useful myth or a useless truth? Rick would say truth, always. The show is not sure Rick is right. And Evil Morty winning the presidential election through a campaign manager who shoots the candidate and takes his place in the final moments is the show's most explicit statement about how reform gets absorbed. The candidate Morty ran on genuine idealism and was killed by the mechanism of his own campaign. The structure did not need to fight him. It just needed to get close enough to replace him from inside. Evil Morty's version of change is not reform, it is arson. He would rather destroy the building than argue about which floor to start on. The 5 episodes of Season 7 following Unmortrican are worth thinking about as a conscious structural choice rather than a step down in stakes. Critics noted that episodes 6 through 10 felt lower energy after the mid-season payoff. This reading is accurate, and I think it is also somewhat unfair to what the show was attempting. Dan Harmon placed Rick Prime's death at episode 5 precisely so that the rest of the season would have to be about the aftermath, about what Rick becomes when the revenge that structured his life is gone. The last 5 episodes of Season 7 are about Rick without a purpose. They are smaller and quieter and sometimes funnier than Unmortrican because they are depicting a person in a kind of drift, a person who accomplished the thing and does not yet know what to do next. The diminishment in scale was intentional. Rick after Rick Prime is smaller. He is just a grandfather now. That is not a failure of imagination. That is a specific and honest thing the show was trying to say. Fear No Mort, as the season finale, is a more significant episode than its reception fully captured. Rick's fear, presented by the fear hole as losing Diane again, is not a surprise by that point in the series. Of course, that is Rick's deepest fear. The show has been building toward that confirmation for 7 seasons. But what the episode does with it, the specific act of hanging Morty's photograph on the wall next to the fear hole, rather than returning inside to Diane, is the show's clearest statement of its own argument. Rick does not need to overcome his fear of losing Diane. He already lost her. What he has to do, what the show has been watching him do for 7 seasons, is find something else to hold on to in a universe that has already shown it will take things from him. The photograph of Morty is the answer. It is not a happy answer. It is a real one. Rick's garage appears repeatedly across the series as the location where his private self is most exposed. The garage is where he works alone. It is where he goes after Unity leaves. It is where the Diane AI's house in C-137 is built around his old workspace. It is where the suicide attempt happens. It is where he does his real work, the work that is not about adventures, but about the problems he is actually trying to solve. The garage is, in a functional sense, Rick's interior life made physical. When the show puts Rick in his garage, it tends to be saying something about who he is when no one is performing for. The adventures happen outside, the truth happens in the garage. The show's brainwave camouflage mechanic, introduced in Season 1, Episode 10, and never fully revisited, has generated sustained debate about whether it is literally true or whether it is a story Rick tells about Morty's function that is less than the whole truth. The mechanic is canon. Morty's brainwaves do provide camouflage for Rick's signal. That part is confirmed. The question is whether the camouflage function is Rick's real reason for keeping Morty around, or whether it is the official explanation Rick has constructed to avoid having to state the real reason. The case that it is an official explanation, rather than a real reason, rests on the behavioral evidence already cataloged across this video. Rick's consistent return to this specific Morty, rather than any available Morty, the brain scan tears, the sacrifice in Season 2, the fear hole photograph. There is one more piece of evidence to add. In Season 3, Episode 1, Rick is in a prison with no Morty around, and he is performing fine. His intelligence is not detectably compromised by the absence of Morty's camouflage in that context. The Galactic Federation detects him precisely where he is and has him precisely captured, which suggests the camouflage either does not function inside Federation simulation technology or functions differently than described. Rick's explanation for the Morty relationship has enough technical truth in it to be defensible and enough gaps in it to be suspicious. The IQ number of 160 that circulates in fan spaces as Rick's canonical intelligence score is entirely fan-generated. The show never states it. It does not appear in any episode, any official supplementary material, or any verified creator statement. What the show actually says, most explicitly, in Season 3, Episode 1, is that Rick is the smartest being in the universe. That claim is simultaneously grander than any specific number and, after Season 5's reveal about the central finite curve, entirely self-referential. The smartest being in the universe is the smartest being in a curated subset of the universe that Rick specifically designed to guarantee that claim would always be true. The IQ myth is interesting, not because of what it says about Rick, but because of what it says about the audience. People want a number, a quantity, a measure that places Rick's intelligence on a legible scale relative to other things. The show is deliberately uninterested in providing this. Rick's intelligence in the show is not a quantity. It is a quality, a way of moving through the world, a set of capabilities and capacities that cannot be meaningfully reduced to a single numerical output. The show refuses the number and gives you the behavior instead. The behavior tells you more than the number would. The number would let you file Rick away. The behavior does not let you file him away. Rick's alcohol use, threaded through almost every episode of the series, is easy to accept as a character texture without noticing how precisely the show handles it. Rick drinks in dangerous situations and in safe ones, and in situations where being impaired is actively counterproductive to his stated goals. There are moments across the series where the drinking is clearly performance, part of the nihilist persona he is maintaining for an audience of whoever is present. And there are moments where the drinking is clearly not performance, where Rick is self-medicating with the functional directness of someone who has found the most reliable available method of managing a pain that does not otherwise respond to management. The Season 2, Episode 3 garage sequence is the clearest example of the latter category. Rick drinks himself unconscious before he can fire the laser at himself. His drinking saves his life in that scene, not through intent, but through the ordinary chemistry of his own habitual consumption. His tolerance is high enough that getting drunk takes serious quantity. His consumption is consistent enough that the quantity comes quickly. He passes out before the decision can be completed. The show is presenting someone genuinely dependent on a substance to manage an internal experience that would otherwise be unmanageable. Not as a joke, not as a quirk, as a portrait of someone whose coping mechanisms are the only thing standing between them and something worse. Dan Harmon has said, across several interview contexts over the years, that Rick's self-destruction is a control freak's way of monopolizing his own fortune. The statement is precise enough to be worth unpacking. If Rick destroys himself, on some level, he has at least controlled the terms of his own destruction. He did not let the universe take anything from him that he did not already take from himself first. He got there before it did. This is the same impulse that drove the central finite curve at the cosmological scale. Rick cannot control the infinite multiverse, but he can control which part of it he operates in. He cannot control whether he will be hurt again, but he can preemptively make himself hurt himself, and at least that is on his terms. Self-destruction as sovereignty. It is a recognizable pattern in real people. The show is honest enough about Rick to depict it without domesticating it into something more palatable. The show's cultural footprint, beyond the ratings and the awards, is instructive to trace because it reflects which elements of Rick and Morty connected most deeply and in what sequence. The nihilism connected first, and it connected hard, in the way that nihilism always connects with audiences young enough or hurt enough to find it liberating rather than depressing. The memes that circulated from the early seasons were mostly about Rick being smarter than everyone, about the multiverse being indifferent, about the pointlessness of constructed meaning. This was the Rick the fandom built its initial engagement around. He was the permission structure. He was the voice that said you do not have to feel bad about not caring, because caring was always optional, because nothing really matters anyway. The deeper engagement emerged later, as the show revealed more of what was underneath the nihilism. The essays and the long rises and the sustained theory discussions about Diane and Rick Prime and Evil Morty's origin. That community investment grew as the show revealed it was actually about something, that the nihilism was not the show's position. The nihilism was Rick's position. The show was examining it, questioning it, and eventually, through 7 seasons of patient accumulated evidence, demonstrating that it was wrong. Not philosophically wrong in some abstract way. Wrong the way a person is wrong when they build a wall around themselves and call it wisdom and what they actually built is a prison. The Season 3 premiere's April Fool's Drop, the midnight streaming, the no-announcement surprise, is a distribution choice that quietly matched the content. The episode that confirmed Rick's backstory was real, that showed you Diane and the garage and the grief, arrived without warning, without build-up, without the machinery of hype that would have told you to be ready for something significant. You found it the way Rick's private emotional life tends to surface, unexpectedly, in the middle of the night, before you had time to prepare a response. Whether that was intentional or simply a consequence of the prank timing, the alignment between form and content was perfect. The most emotionally revealing episode of the series' run arrived the way Rick would have wanted it to arrive, at midnight, as a joke, so you would not know to brace for it. The Szechuan sauce moment that same night entered pop culture for its own reasons and generated its own discourse, most of which was about something other than the episode's emotional content. This is also, in a strange way, appropriate. The show has always allowed its most significant moments to be obscured by its most chaotic ones. The noise covers the signal. Rick's pain is always happening under the adventure. The fandom arguing about discontinued condiments while an episode about a man's dead wife played is almost a perfect microcosm of how Rick Sanchez operates in his own show. The show's renewal through at least season 12, bringing its run toward 2029, raises a question worth sitting with. What does Rick Sanchez look like in a show that has already resolved its central villain conflict and its central backstory mystery, that has confirmed the emotional truth underneath the nihilism, that has put Evil Morty outside the curve with the most dangerous weapon in the mythology? The answer is that the show gets to explore what Rick actually is without the scaffolding of mystery around it. It gets to be about a man who has lost his purpose and is finding out who he is without it. That is, in many ways, a harder and more interesting story than the backstory mystery or the Rick Prime hunt. Those stories had a known destination. This one does not. Rick Sanchez without Rick Prime is a question the show is still in the process of answering. And the answer will not arrive as a single revelation. It will arrive the way everything true about Rick arrives, slowly, in behavior, under noise, at midnight, before you were ready for it. The question of what Rick does between adventures, in the ordinary fabric of domestic life with the Smith family, is one the show keeps raising and never fully answers. The show periodically drops you into a scene of Rick just existing in the house, watching television or sitting at the kitchen table or walking through the living room without a portal gun in hand, and what those scenes reveal is something the adventure plots cannot. In the adventure plots, Rick has a task. He has a problem to solve. He has a reason to be present that is separate from any emotional acknowledgement of the people around him. In the domestic scenes, the only thing keeping him there is that he chose to be there. He is not trapped. He could leave at any moment. He stays. The fact of Rick staying is the most underrated evidence in the entire Rick Secretly Cares case. Rick Secretly Cares case. Rick C-137 is possibly the most mobile being in the history of fiction. He has a device that opens doors to infinite dimensions. He has the intelligence to survive in virtually any environment. He has no legal obligation, no physical constraint, no limitation that would prevent him from leaving the Smith family at any point and going literally anywhere else in existence. He stays. He stays in this house, in this dimension, with this family, across season after season, through conflicts and crises and moments where leaving would obviously be the simpler path. He stays, and he performs not caring about being there. The performance does not change the fact of the staying. The show made its most elegant statement about this in Season 3, Episode 10, The Rick and Morty Date, when Rick walks away from a politically significant conflict with the President of the United States because Morty called and he would rather go play a video game with him. The episode is funny, and the choice is played largely as comedy, but the underlying data point is one of the clearest in the show's history. Rick, who has survived the Galactic Federation and the Council of Ricks, and Rick Prime, and Evil Morty, and the destruction of the Citadel, who has literally nothing to fear from the President of the United States, walks away from that conflict because Morty wanted to spend an afternoon together. Not because he had to, because he wanted to. Get Swifty, from earlier in Season 2, is usually discussed as a comedy episode about an intergalactic singing competition. And it is, but it contains one clear data point about Rick's relationship to Earth and the people on it. When Earth is placed in genuine jeopardy, when the outcome is the genuine potential destruction of the planet and everyone on it, Rick's response is not the shrug he would perform in a lesser scenario. He is urgent. He is focused. He is doing what needs to be done, not because the problem is intellectually interesting, but because the outcome matters to him. The show is consistent about this. Rick performs not caring about Earth and the people on it. When Earth is actually in danger, his behavior immediately contradicts the performance. The show's handling of Morty's psychological well-being across its run is one of the more uncomfortable things to sit with once you are paying attention to it. Morty has been through genuinely traumatic experiences as a direct consequence of traveling with Rick. He has died in parallel universes. He has been weaponized by Rick in situations where another approach was available. He has had memories implanted by Rick in ways Rick found expedient. He has watched things that no teenager should watch, and survived things that would leave lasting psychological marks on most adults. The show acknowledges this intermittently. It does not let Morty's damage be invisible, and yet Rick keeps taking Morty with him. This is partly the camouflage argument, which we have already established as insufficient on its own. But there is another reading, which is that Rick keeps Morty close partly because the alternative, leaving Morty somewhere he cannot see him, is worse. The overprotective control freak quality that runs through Rick's behavior with Morty reads differently once you know the backstory. Rick had a family he could not protect. He lost them to something he did not see coming. He is not going to lose Morty the same way. The closeness that sometimes looks like Rick using Morty as a tool is also Rick keeping the one thing he currently holds on to within arm's reach at all times. The show's treatment of time within episodes and the way it handles memories and continuity is worth a brief note. Rick and Morty explicitly established early in its run that the show's characters carry memories of past events even when the plot appears to reset. This became more significant as the show developed serialized threads. The memory of burying themselves in the backyard stays with Morty. The knowledge of what happened in Total Recall stays with the family. Rick's awareness of what he did to C-137 stays with Rick. The show is not amnesiac about its own events. It simply chooses when to foreground them and when to let them settle under the episode's surface. This matters for how you read Rick's psychological state across any given episode. When Rick is in a comedic adventure in Season 4 and performing the nihilism and making chaotic decisions, he also knows everything that happened in Seasons 1 through 3. He knows about the garage. He knows about the sacrifice. He knows about the backstory he showed Cornelius Daniel and that he then claimed was fabricated. The performance in any given episode happens on top of accumulated history the character carries. Rick is always operating with everything he knows, which is considerable. The performance is not ignorance. It is choice. The show's most direct engagement with the Rick secretly cares reading comes not in a dramatic revelation, but in a small scene in Season 1, Episode 6, after Rick and Morty have buried their doubles and are standing in the backyard of a dimension that is not theirs. Morty is crying. He tells Rick he will never be able to be okay again after what they just did. And Rick, who in any other context would dismiss this with a wave and a deflection, tells Morty that he will be fine. Not dismissively, with something closer to certainty. With the tone of someone who has been through worse and survived it and is willing to acknowledge, briefly, that survival is possible. It is a small moment. The show moves past it immediately. But it is Rick being honest with Morty in a way he is almost never honest with anyone. The specific geography of the show's multiverse matters more as the series progresses and is worth getting clear on because fan confusion about it is widespread. Dimension C-137 is Rick's birth dimension. It is where he was born, where he lived with Diane and Beth, where he grieved after the portal bomb. It is not the dimension where Morty was born and grew up. Morty's native dimension, the prime dimension, is the same dimension that was Cronenberged in Season 1, Episode 6, the same dimension that Rick Prime was born in. Rick Prime is Morty's biological grandfather by birth. Rick C-137 is not related to Morty by blood. He settled in Morty's dimension deliberately, as a substitute grandfather, in a family that Rick Prime had abandoned. This geography was a source of widespread fan confusion from Season 1 through Season 5, partly because the show used the label C-137 in a way that implied it referred to Morty's home dimension as well as Rick's. Season 6, Episode 1 explicitly resolved the confusion, but by that point the misunderstanding was entrenched enough that even fans who had been watching closely needed the clarification. The show was not careless about this. The ambiguity in the early seasons was partly deliberate, allowing the full significance of the reveal in Season 6 to land with appropriate force. If you knew from Season 1 that Rick was not Morty's biological grandfather, the Season 6 confirmation would have been information rather than a revelation. 2 Primetime Emmy wins for Outstanding Animated Program place Rick and Morty in very specific company for an Adult Swim production. The show won first in 2018 for Pickle Rick, an episode that is brilliant as a piece of craft and that operates largely as an action comedy vehicle for Rick's problem-solving abilities under constraint. The second win in 2020 was for the Vat of Acid episode, which is structurally one of the most formally inventive episodes of the series, built around a mechanic the show introduces as a joke and develops into a genuine emotional sequence. Both winning episodes demonstrate something consistent about what the Academy recognized in the show: its ability to work simultaneously as pure entertainment and as something with genuine formal and emotional intelligence underneath. The cultural conversation around Rick and Morty in the years between Season 3 and Season 5 represents a specific and somewhat fascinating moment in how adult animation is discussed. The show had become mainstream enough to have a cultural footprint, but specific enough in its continuity to reward sustained engagement in a way that casual viewers could not fully access. The fandom operated on multiple levels simultaneously: the people who came for the comedy and stayed for the memes, and the people who had been tracking the lore since Season 1, and for whom each new episode was an event to be realized. Both audiences are real. The show spoke differently to each of them, and managed for several seasons to satisfy both. The question of whether Rick is redeemable, which the fandom has been arguing across the show's entire run, is one the show has carefully refused to resolve. Redemption implies a moral arc, a movement from a worse state to a better one, a character learning something that changes how they function. Rick's arc across 7 seasons is not that. He does not become a better person in the way that redemption would require. He becomes, slowly and episodically, less defended. He becomes slightly more willing to let things matter in ways he cannot control. He hangs Morty's photograph on the wall next to the fear hole. He destroys the Diane AI in C-137. He beats Rick Prime to death with his bare hands and then just stands there, alone with what that achieved, which is nothing anyone would recognize as peace. The show's argument is not that Rick redeems himself. The show's argument is that Rick endures. He keeps staying in this house, and this family, and this dimension, long after any practical reason for doing so has expired. He keeps being hurt and disappointed and furious and in pain, and staying anyway. The Catchphrase translation from Season 1 is the most honest description of what Rick has been doing since the series began. He has been in great pain, and he has been asking for help in a language nobody around him speaks, and he has been staying. That is not redemption. It is something more honest than redemption. It is the ordinary reality of a person who has been broken and decided to keep going anyway, without fixing the break, without resolving the pain, without achieving the peace that would make the story feel finished. Rick Sanchez is not finished. The show is not finished with him. And the openness of his story, the refusal to resolve it cleanly into recovery or ruin, is exactly what keeps the theories coming. You keep looking for the answer the show has decided not to give you. You keep finding evidence that suggests you are almost there. And then Rick puts his mask back on and goes somewhere new and takes you with him, because that is what Rick does, and because you do not want to stop following. Morty's own arc across the series is the shadow argument running alongside every Rick Sanchez theory, and it deserves recognition as such, because what Morty becomes over 7 seasons is not the naive boy the show started with, and not the unformed accessory that the camouflage mechanic implies. He is a person who has accumulated damage and kept going, much the way Rick has, but without Rick's decades of practice at converting the damage into something functional. Morty is Rick without the armor yet. The show occasionally makes this explicit. More often, it lets you notice it yourself. In the moments where Morty makes a decision that Rick would make, or refuses to make a decision in a way that Rick would refuse, or snaps at someone in a way that has a specific familiar cadence. The Morty is becoming Rick thread runs through the show's later seasons with increasing visibility. Morty has died in parallel dimensions and been replaced, has carried a buried version of himself, has been through situations that reshuffled his sense of what is real and what is allowed. He does not talk about most of it. He processes it the same way Rick processes things, by not processing it, by putting it somewhere and continuing. The show holds the question of what Morty will eventually be without resolving it, partly because Morty is still becoming it, and partly because the most honest answer is that he is becoming Rick, and the show is not sure that is good news. Rick's relationship with Summer, Morty's older sister, is one of the show's most intermittently developed threads. Summer is competent and aggressive and genuinely interested in Rick in ways that Morty's reluctant participation never is. When Summer is given episodes that focus on her relationship with Rick, the show explores a version of the dynamic where the person accompanying Rick is there because they want to be, because they find it exciting, because they are not afraid of what it costs. The show usually contextualizes this as revealing something worrying about Summer's character, her comfort with darkness, her willingness to operate in moral ambiguity. But it also reveals something about Rick. He is capable of a different kind of relationship with a grandchild who does not need to be protected. The Summer episodes are Rick without the protective mode. They are interesting precisely because they show you something the Morty dynamic structurally prevents. The voice transition from Justin Roiland to Ian Cardoni for Rick and Harry Belden for Morty represents the most significant test the show has faced in terms of identity continuity. A character voice in animation is often closer to the character than almost any other single element. It is the texture of the inner life made audible. The fact that the transition was received as well as it was by professional critics, and that it succeeded in terms of the show's own internal continuity, says something about the robustness of what Roiland and Harmon built. The character survived the replacement because the character was always more than the voice. Rick Sanchez is an architecture. The architecture held. For viewers who have watched from the beginning, the transition produces a specific experience in the early episodes of Season 7. You are aware that something is different. You keep listening for the distinction. And then, a few minutes in, the scene is doing what it needs to do, and you are in it, and the voice is simply Rick's voice, because the scene is doing its job. This is what the critics meant by seamless. Not that the new voices are identical, it is that they are close enough and the writing is good enough that the character asserts itself over the vocal texture, and you remember that you are here for the character. The show's treatment of mortality is complicated by the multiverse and worth thinking about in that context. Death in Rick and Morty is not final in the way it is final in shows without dimensional travel. Versions of characters die in individual episodes and are replaced by versions from other dimensions without the show treating this as particularly heavy. The show is honest about what this cost. Morty has buried himself, has watched a version of himself die, has had to acknowledge that the continuity of his identity across dimensions is a philosophical question rather than a settled fact. The lightness with which the show handles individual deaths in the multiverse is not nihilism. It is the show's characters having integrated what their existence actually entails. Death within the multiverse is a kind of location change. Death via the Omega device is the only irreversible kind. This is why Evil Morty taking the Omega device schematics is not just a plot development. It is a statement about scale. Evil Morty now possesses the only form of death that matters in a universe with infinite versions of everyone. He can unmake someone from every possible timeline. In a show that has spent 7 seasons using the multiverse to make death provisional and reversible, this weapon is the exception that proves the rule. The Omega device is the show acknowledging that its own framework can be made lethal, and giving it to Evil Morty, the character who has spent his entire arc escaping Rick's framework, is giving the anti-Rick the one tool that operates completely outside the rules Rick's universe established. Dan Harmon's publicly stated comment that nobody wants a universe without Rick and Morty is worth taking seriously as a creative position rather than just promotional copy. Harmon has been candid throughout the show's run about his own ambivalence toward serialization, toward continuity, toward the weight of canon as a creative constraint. His statement that the show's renewal makes sense because the list of places to go remains infinite is consistent with his creative philosophy. The show has always been oriented toward the next idea rather than toward resolution. The multiverse premise was not just a narrative convenience. It was a philosophical match for how Harmon thinks about storytelling. You do not have to finish. You just have to keep finding somewhere worth going. The show's 9 seasons and counting place it in a different conversation than it occupied in its first few years. What began as a cult adult animation experiment on a late-night cable block has become one of the longest-running animated series in the current television landscape, with a genuine continuity and a character arc that, when you trace it from the December 2013 pilot to the Season 7 finale, covers more genuine narrative ground than most prestige dramas manage in their entire runs. Rick Sanchez is, by Season 7, a meaningfully different person than the one who burst into Morty's bedroom in the opening minutes of Episode 1. Not a better person, necessarily, a more revealed one. The layers have come off slowly and painfully across a decade of television, and what is underneath them is still complicated, and still in pain, and still staying anyway. The theories will keep coming because the show keeps generating material for them. Every episode that reveals something new about Rick also creates new questions. Every confirmed piece of lore reorganizes what came before it in ways that make old moments legible differently. The brain scan tears in Season 1 mean something different now than they meant in 2014. The garage suicide attempt means something different now than it meant in 2015. The backstory memory plays differently now that it is confirmed to be real. The show has been building a body of work where almost nothing is throwaway, where the things that seemed like jokes in early seasons were actually the most honest moments the show has ever produced, and where the central character is, underneath everything, exactly who his catchphrase said he was from the beginning. The fact that the show has generated this many sustained, serious, well-evidenced theories is itself a measure of something. Most television, including very good television, does not produce this. Most television resolves its questions as it raises them, offers clean, emotional beats, leaves its audience satisfied in the moment, and not particularly driven to re-arise what they just watched. Rick and Morty does the opposite. It raises questions and delays the answers for seasons. It confirms things obliquely, through a villain's careless phrasing or a character's furious reaction. It delivers its most significant revelations at midnight without announcement, or buried in the middle episode of a season rather than the finale, or through the music it chooses rather than the dialogue it writes. The theories exist because the show respects its audience enough to withhold, to trust that the withholding will be felt rather than just noticed, and to believe that the audience is paying close enough attention to earn what they eventually find. After more than a decade of episodes, that trust has been justified in both directions. The show kept building something worth finding. The audience kept looking. The theories are the record of that ongoing search. The long conversation between a show and its viewers about a man in a garage who was in great pain and asked for help in a language nobody around him spoke. And the conversation, 10 years and 9 seasons in, is still very much going. Rick and Morty has been on the air since December 2nd, 2013. In that time, it has gone from a cult Adult Swim experiment to one of the most discussed animated series in the history of American television. It won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program in 2018 for Pickle Rick, the show's first Emmy win. It won the same category again in 2020 for the Vat of Acid episode. Season 3 delivered the highest ratings in Adult Swim's history at the time of broadcast, with viewership growing 81% over Season 2. It generated academic essays and psychology rereases and viral moments, and an incident involving a fast food dipping sauce that is still discussed years later. It has survived its creator's departure and kept producing television that, at its best, functions as genuine drama, wearing a cartoon science fiction disguise. But the reason it still generates this much conversation, the reason you are listening to this right now, is that Rick Sanchez is one of the most carefully constructed characters in contemporary animation. The show is not primarily about aliens or dimension hopping or grotesque mutations or the politics of the Citadel. Those are the scaffolding. The show is about a man who decided, after losing everything he loved, to turn grief into a method, to build his intelligence into a weapon, to construct a universe where he was guaranteed to always be the smartest, always be in control, always be the person who could not be caught off guard. And then to be caught off guard by a teenage boy from a dimension that was never supposed to be his, in a family that was never supposed to be his, over and over again for a decade of television. The theories about Rick exist because the show built a character deep enough that watching him does not resolve the questions he raises. Who is Rick Sanchez underneath the performance? What would he be if you took away the nihilism and the alcohol and the intelligence and the calculated deflection and the 2.5 seasons of ambiguity about his dead wife? What is left when you remove all of it? The show's answer, delivered slowly and quietly across more than a decade, is something very simple. A man who loved a woman named Diane, who had a daughter named Beth, who refused an offer from another version of himself that he thought he did not need, and who has been, since one bad afternoon in his living room, trying to figure out what to do with the rest of his life. That is the version underneath all the theories, the one all of them are reaching for. If you made it this far, thank you for spending the night with us here on Rick R. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.